Hello and welcome to The View from 22. I'm John Connolly, the Spectator's news editor. This week we're going to be talking about a pretty horrific attack which occurred in Clapham last week. It was a chemical attack against a woman and two of her daughters. The lead suspect is still on the run, but the case has pretty disturbing implications when it comes to national policy. To talk to me about this is the academic, the Professor of Politics and International Relations, Matt Goodwin. He's also the author of several books and his own Substack. Matt, to start us off, can you explain to us a bit about the lead suspect in this case, a chap called Abdul Ezedi, especially in terms of how did he come to this country, how did he arrive, and why is he still here?
Yeah, well, I think in many ways this case symbolises much that's wrong with the country. This is somebody who entered Britain illegally, we are told on a lorry in 2016, who then applied for asylum twice, was denied, then went on to commit what we're told are serious sexual offences and was indeed convicted in 2018, then applied for asylum again, and this time around his application was approved because he claimed to have converted to Christianity, and a priest signed off on that claim. And of course, then he went on to commit these absolutely horrific acts of violence and attempted murder against the mother and her two young children. So, look, to me, this isn't actually about an individual case. What this is a symbol of how our asylum system is simply no longer fit for purpose. That's essentially what this case is about.
Matt, there's tons to unpack there, and like you say, it seems to sort of point a finger at several parts of the British state of being a tremendous issue. Let's start with the fact that Ezedi had been convicted of a sexual offence and then received asylum. I think most people watching this would be quite surprised that anyone who's convicted of that sort of crime would be allowed to stay in the UK. I mean, what's going on there? How has that been allowed?
Well, the first thing to say is he's certainly not alone. We have somewhere in the region, firstly, of around 10,000 foreign national offenders in Britain's jails. We've seen think tanks recently, like the Centre for Policy Studies, point to the number of foreign nationals who are on Britain's streets, having committed very serious crimes or actually planning acts of terrorism. Some of them have even been pointed to by MI5 and the security services as a serious ongoing threat to the safety and security of the British people. This is not, by the way, what most ordinary Brits want. I've polled them on this. 75% say they do not think foreign nationals who commit crimes should be allowed to stay in the country. And they also feel the same way about foreign nationals who glorify terrorism. They should be removed from the country. And we just had a recent survey in France finding the same. Over 80% of the French say if you commit a crime, you enter the country, you're not from the country, you commit a crime, you should be removed. What's going on is that we have a human rights architecture, a legal architecture that is partly supported by UK legislation, things like the Human Rights Act, Modern Slavery Act, and so on, which allows these individuals to essentially game the system, even if they've entered the country illegally, even if they've committed serious crimes. And in some cases, as in this case, it's not just that they're able to successfully obtain asylum, but they then go on to commit even more serious crimes. So we are, I think, in a very vulnerable position. We know the numbers of illegal migrants are going up. We know we've had about 112,000 people enter the country illegally since 2018. We know we have no serious ongoing solution to the border crisis. And alongside that, we know that overall levels of migration are also surging to historic highs. So many people will be watching this case, firstly saying, I think we should do whatever we need to do in terms of judicial arrangements to ensure that we prioritise the safety and security of the British people. To me, that's a no-brainer. What we have is a system that does the opposite. It actually prioritises the interests and the wishes and the priorities of illegal migrants over the safety and security of British people. And I personally think that needs to change.
Matt, we should mention here that the rules were toughened last year by Suella Braverman when she was Home Secretary. I think it used to be that if you were sentenced to over 4 years in prison, your asylum decision would not usually be approved. That was lowered to 12 months. Do you think that's low enough, or do you think it should be applied wider?
I actually take quite a hard line on this. My view is if you're a foreign national, particularly like Ezedi, and you've entered the country illegally, I think firstly, illegal migrants, unless they have a genuine reason for being here, should be removed from the country, full stop. And I think those who commit crimes especially should be removed, irrespective of appeals to human rights conventions. What we've seen in recent years has been truly scandalous. I wrote about it on Substack. If you look at the cases, for example, of murderers, rapists, Class A drug dealers who have been taken off deportation flights because of judicial activism by lawyers and by NGOs. It is absolutely outrageous when you look at some of the cases that have slipped through that net. And I think more generally, to be frank, what it's pointing to is the power and influence of what some have called the charity industrial complex that surrounds the judicial system, that we have an army of NGOs, think tankers, lawyers, and so forth, who will basically do whatever they can to prevent anybody and everybody from being deported from the country. And this is a minority view, right? This is a minority view. As I say, over 70, 80% of voters do not want these things to be happening. And also, if you ask the Brits, do you think we should leave international courts and conventions that would allow us to have much more control over who comes in and out of the country? They say absolutely. They are open to leaving things like the European Convention on Human Rights, by the way, which Suella Braverman and others have called for. It is not true that that is a very unpopular policy. If you frame that policy as giving us much greater control over dealing with people like Abdul Ezedi, most Brits fall in line and say, absolutely. I think we're now at a point with a global migration crisis with serious threats from radical Islamism, from radical Islamist violence. And by the way, we've just seen that with Mike Freer, the Member of Parliament, being forced out of office by radical Islamists. I think many people now are realizing that actually what we need to do is overhaul and strengthen our existing legislative architecture so we can deal with these cases much more robustly.
Turning to another aspect of the Ezedi case, Matt, I mean, one you mentioned there in your first answer, the fact that Ezedi seemingly was able to gain asylum at least partially because he converted to Christianity. It seems it's come forward that there's evidence that conversion is apparently bogus, or very much appears to be bogus. How much of a problem do you think this is?
It's a very big
more
problem.
widely.
Yeah,
Is it just? It's not just a Ezedi case.
I think other people have made this point just as eloquently. I've seen Melanie Phillips being one of them who's written about it. The Church of England had some serious questions to answer. We know that we've got, I think, looking at the latest numbers, 40 or 50 of the illegal migrants on the boat who have applied for have started the conversion process, I should say, essentially using this as a way to game the system. That's what's happening here. This is not a sudden, conversion to Christianity. This is a crude means of gaming the system. And I think when we talk about the influence of the charity industrial complex, that also includes many religious institutions who are often led by people who have good intentions, but who are, I think, actually making the situation a lot worse. Whoever signed off on Ezedi, I'd like to know who they are. I think we should be having a debate about what happened in that process. How was that process managed? I think it's utterly ridiculous that kind of criteria is used to allow somebody who's already committed serious sexual offences to stay in the country. I don't think that's correct. I don't think the British people should have somebody like that walking around the streets of their country. And if you look at the actual consequences are serious. If you look, for example, at, say, the Liverpool bomber, same story. Asylum seeker came into the country, claimed to be a Christian, and then gamed the system, went on to try and bomb the hospital in Liverpool. We're not talking about things here that don't matter. We're talking about things that have serious consequences for the British people. And what I would argue is we're seeing the ongoing influence of the luxury belief class in this country, people who pursue and advocate policies like open borders, like relaxed policies on refugees and illegal migrants, who will not suffer the costs of those policies, but which will impose enormous costs on other people, like the mother and the two daughters who suffered this horrific attack. That's what we have in this country, an elite class within the institutions, within the Church of England, I would argue, within the NGOs, the charities, the courts, who are routinely advocating luxury beliefs that bring them very few, if any, costs, but seriously impact in a negative way the ways of life for ordinary British people, for ordinary families trying to go about their job. That is ultimately at the heart of this. This isn't really about Abdul Ezedi. I mean, he's a nasty piece of work. I hope he's found. I hope he's removed from the country. This is actually about the new elite who are running the institutions in this country, who have a fundamentally different view of these issues than the vast majority of British people who have to live with the consequences of them.
We should, on that vein, mention some of the responses from government figures. I mean, in particular, we had Education Secretary Gillian Keegan say that this case is not really about asylum, it's about violence against women. I mean, what did you make of that?
Well, I thought it was a great example of just how weak our political class have become. Gillian Keegan strikes me as somebody who probably should be in the Liberal Democrats rather than the Conservative Party. If you look at actually what this case is about, clearly is about a broken illegal migration system that has been exploited by this individual, who has clearly been briefed and informed how to play how to exploit the rules, how to cut the corners, how to get a third asylum application through the system, despite having convicted a serious sexual assault and exposed himself to somebody. Yeah, sorry, this is about asylum. This is about illegal migration. This is about the borders being in chaos. This is about the government for the last 14 years still not finding a way of actually strengthening the borders and not finding a way of prioritising the security of the British people. And the other thing is, by the way, while we're having this conversation, is this is also about what we don't know. One of the things we don't know in this country is just how much serious crime and violence is committed by illegal migrants and asylum seekers, largely because it's very difficult to get hold of the data. We don't really know just how endemic some of these issues really are. I'll tell you one statistic that we do know, however, which one of our newspapers confirmed over the last week, which is that Britain now has the highest rate of chemical attacks against women in the world. We've had over 700 chemical-based attacks against women over the last year, which is a sharp increase from the year before. Now, I had to look at the statistic twice in one of our national newspapers to make sure I was reading it correctly. What's that about? So I do feel quite strongly about it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Matt.
But thank you for having me.